So what is the what is the reason about this title, right? Azure SQL Journey, the daily routine of Cloud DBA. We're working with customer because at the end we are support engineers. So we are, let's say, seeing the bad things and the good things every day, working with the product, with SQL Data Server, SQL Azure, managed instance, etc. So the idea in this presentation is to share with you what could be, let's say, the daily basis of one Cloud DBA, what you need to do, what you need to know, and what is the best things in order to do your work. Okay, so the first thing is my colleague, the presentation of my colleague Roberto. Roberto is a senior cloud solution architect. You have the details of contacts here. As Magnus mentioned, he's based in Las Colinas in Texas. He is a speaker in multiple events, and he's having worked in Microsoft for more than 13 years. My name is José Manuel Jurado. I'm an escalation engineer working with Azure SQL Database. And this is the details of contacts. And well, as you could see, after 11 years working in Microsoft, I support many technologies in basically Azure SQL Database, SQL Core, analysis services, VMs, etc. And also, I am a speaker. I speak in multiple events, and also I have my MCT certification. The main thing is we are working with customers. We are working with you. So for the reason, this is the main idea, is to share our experience with you. So what is the routines that we have for our Cloud DBA? Well, we split your calendar or your agenda in different things. The first thing is how to choose your environment. It's very important right now to choose your environment, because at the end, when you want to move or install or transfer or move your database, you need to be sure what is the technology for you in order to pay less, because it's very important right now, this option. So we are going to explain several details, what is the best offering for you. The second part of the, let's say, of the day is how to configure the high availability. By default, in SQL Azure, you have several options that it's installed by default. So you have SQL Always On, we have 3 copies of the data, but you could do more. Okay, so I'm going to explain a little bit about how to do it. Other things is about review and configure your backup. Okay, this is the best typical question, that where is my backup? I need to do my backup or not. So when you move to Azure SQL Database or managed instance, at the end, we are going to do the backup for you. Okay, but we are going to explain other backups, other methodology in terms of backups. We are going to explain several other aspects about it. Other question that we used to have is how to secure my database. Okay, it's very important, because how Microsoft prevent the access, how I could implement more, or what is the option that I have in order to log in or tracing the logins that I have. Other thing is about the login and tracing database. We are going to talk about the different options that we have. We are going to have during the presentation, more than to deliver a session to go a demo, I'm going to, for every module, I'm going to go through different options from the portal. Besides that, explain everything, I'm going to explain one and go to the portal and explain with some more details. Okay, and other things that is very important for us, I think that is key, it's help to others. So why? Because we are working with developers. Right now, one of the biggest changes that as a DBA that we are going to have in the cloud, it's you are going to work with developers, with data science, data engineers, and also you need to know more about other technologies, because not SQL Server, for example, to know that you have any other technology that is called Azure Data Factory in order to transfer the data in your ETL, or for example, save the data, for example, in storage account, because you don't need this data, because you need just only to archive the data and save a space in your database. So right now we have other roles that is very important to know as a DBA. Okay, so at the beginning is, let's say that the DBA, like we know in on-premises, let's say that has been changed a lot when you are going to the in the cloud. You have the same, but you need to know any other aspect about it. Okay, so basically, most probably you know this option is how to choose your environment. Basically, we have 3 environments in Azure SQL Database. First is SQL Managed Instance. Okay, SQL Server in VMs. So in VMs, that means that, okay, you could install your SQL Server, you could install your another additional server in order to create your class, your always-on environment. You are going to have the access to the control of everything. So at the end, everything that is under your control. Okay, you need to implement the backups, patching, etc. So, but if you want to, let's say, to do the same, but you don't want to, let's say, to put focus about the high ability, let's say. So you could choose managed instance, because managed instance, when you create a managed instance, you are going to have more or less the same capabilities or features that you have in SQL Server, but the high ability and the backups is automatically done by the service. But of course, you have other services or in services that we have previously. For example, there is no need to install patches because we are going to install for you, etc. So as you can see, this is the option that you have. And finally, you have other option. Let's say that it's more than database scope. Okay, it's called SQL Azure Database. SQL Azure Database is basically when you need a database, for example, in order to for your service. For example, I don't need, for example, SQL Agent. I don't need to implement CLR. Basically, I need to have this database with some capabilities in order to run my process, because SQL Microsoft prevents any problems in terms of high ability, in terms of backups. So in this part, this is the different flavors that you have based in right now in SQL. For this reason, is very important because using this one, you are going to pay less or more or less, and also you have different capabilities. For example, between the main difference for us in terms of paths between managed instance, a database, here is managed instance is a SQL instance, SQL Server that you could install or manage 100 up to 100 databases. In Azure SQL Database will be that you are going to manage just only one database. You know that we have several things that is called elastic pools, but we need to mention one thing. Elastic pool means that you are going to have a SQL Server that run multiple databases, but these databases are not able to see it, let's say, among them. So you cannot run in the similar manner that we are running in SQL Server that specified select start from database 1, .dbo, my table. This is not possible, but you could use one thing that is called elastic query. That allows you to connect to the same server or the databases or in another server. Okay. So for the reason, is very important when you move to Azure. It's right now the services that we used to install it on premises is different right now. Okay, so for example, if I want to run integration services, you need to use one thing that is called Azure Data Factory. Okay, Azure Data Factory, it's able to run a integration package, or it's able to run other aspects in ETL. So it's a huge tool that you could do everything. So connect to multiple sources, running in Azure, scale up, scale down the resources that you have, etc. But the most important thing is if you have package, like in integration services, you could run this one. Other things is about analysis services. Yes, analysis services. Right now we have another PaaS services that it's in the similar manner that we use in analysis services. And finally, we have reporting services. Of course, that you could use reporting services. You could install reporting services and virtual machine to transfer all the reports that you have in this virtual machine and run it, or to use the new option that we have that is called Power BI, that we have many other things. So this is the, let's say, the different things that we have, okay? Once we have this, once we know what is the best choice, what is the best thing that we have, is to choose what is the service tiers and the database size that we have. Okay. By default, you could choose, as you could see, you could have several flavors in Azure SQL Database that is called serverless. Serverless is a system, is a new database tier that we have that the database will pause if you're not using up to 1 hour. You could specify 1 hour until, I don't remember, 6 hours. So that means that if you don't receive, if the database didn't receive any connection to this database, we are going to pause. And of course, during this period of time, you are not going to be charged. Okay. Other option that we have is auto scale. Auto scale means that if serverless detects that they need more CPU, automatically you are going to have more CPU in this case. Other database tier that we have is very interesting is hyperscale. Right now, hyperscale we could consider like, how to say this one, a medium data warehouse. So why? Because you have 100 terabytes of data. Okay, so it's a huge amount of data. So we have another system, but you could bring this the data you have here, because in behind the scenes, in hyperscale, the storage that we have behind the scenes is something different that we have in on-premises. So for the reason, the main characteristic is you have 100 terabytes of data, you have 13 named replicas. Named replicas means the following. So I could synchronize my, let's say, my primary replica or hyperscale that I have, for example, in West Europe. I could make another replica, let's say, in another country or West Europe or in another place. So at the end, you are going to have up to 13 named replicas around the globe. Okay, synchronized. It's more or less, it's implemented by Always On. Other service tiers that you have is provisioning. So you have two methodologies. You have vCores or you have DTUs. Basically, you could choose vCores, but basically the most important thing is the main difference between general purpose and business critical is the I/O. Okay, the number of vCores will be more or less the same. You could choose, I'm going to show you right now an example, but the main thing that if you need of your application or your database needs a low I/O latency, you need to choose business critical. Other things that you have, it's about DTU. So DTU, it's another methodology. It's a previous methodology, a previous service tiers that we have. Right now, I'm not going to say that it's deprecated, but it's data throughput unit. Basically, it's the capacity to run something in terms of I/O, vCores, and log I/O. Okay. More or less, right now, all the customers, all the DBAs are moving to vCores because they have, let's say, if I need to move my on-premise server that has six vCores, I would like to have 6 vCores in Azure. But if in DTU, I need to have a formula that, for example, in general purpose, in DTU, you need to use several formulas in order to know how many vCores that you need. For example, in standard, in DTU, you need to calculate that every 100 DTU is 1 vCore, but in premium, every 125 it's 1 vCore. So for the reason, normally, based on our experience, more or less all the customers move into vCore. Other things that is very important is about Elastic Database Pool. For me, the most important thing that when you are a DBA, you choose Elastic Pool is because two things. You are sharing, you need to think that, or you need to know that you are sharing the same instance. So that means that if you create or you add 3 databases in the same Elastic Pool, means that you are sharing the resources, CPU, memory, I/O, etc., in the same SQL instance. Okay. As I mentioned before, it's not possible to run cross databases like you know in on-premises, but as I mentioned before, running query Elastic query is possible. What happened is I have a problem in Elastic Pool and I need, for example, or we need to apply one patch, let's say, in Elastic Pool, but all the databases that you have in this Elastic Pool will be affected, okay? So for the reason, it's very important to know that Elastic Database Pool means that that they are sharing the same instance. Of course, depending on, we have several details, how is the best, is Elastic Pool or not, but it's another, I don't want to take more time for this because we have other sessions, other slides. We have other methods, or we have other databases. As you could see, this is an example. Most probably right now it's not up to date, but of course you have a lot of details that I'm not going to take more time for this. As we mentioned about serverless, basically it's very important to know this. So if during 1 hour the database didn't receive any connections, the database will be in pause. We are not going to charge, and we are going to start to charge when we receive the first connection. What does mean in the first connections? Most probably because you are going to receive a call from the developer, say, okay, I tried to connect to my database, but the database seems that it's not responding. Well, think about auto close that you have in on-premises. In on-premises, when you specified auto close and you try to connect to the database, you know that SQL Server needs to open the database again, needs to find workers, needs to find memory, etc. Will take time. So the connection will take time. So more or less is the same that you have in serverless. So we need to start up the database. Okay, so for the reason, it's very important that you need to increase, so the developers needs to increase the timeout of the connections, or even to apply a retry policy to wait almost no more than 60 seconds in order to complete the connection, okay? This is for SQL Server. Another thing is about managed instance, okay? So as you can see, in managed instance, you have the same technology, but in this case, we have just only V cores, okay? You have general purpose and business critical, more or less is the same about the I/O. And as you can see in this screen, you can see how much is the capacity in terms to choose how many V cores that you want or what is the storage that you need. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example how it's possible, for example, to choose one server or one database. So right now this is one of the servers that I have. I'm going to go to my databases. I'm going to click here. So as you can see here, for example, I'm going to change. This is right now is a standard S2, is 15 DTUs. As I mentioned before, 15 DTUs means the half of the part of one vCore because it's standard. I could change the storage, or I could change right now because I need more. For example, if I need more, for example, hyperscale. If I change to hyperscale, as you can see here, I could choose how many vCores that I need, how many replicas that I need right now. And other things that is very, very important, it's about the backup storage redundancy. For me, when I saw this, for me, I was a DBA. I was a DBA in the past. I'm going to sleep very well every day because, as you can see, you have 3 copies. And besides that, you have 3 copies internally about the backup. You have 3 different methodologies. You have due redundant backup storage. That means that once we have the backup, we are going to move this backup to another data center. Okay. When you have redundant backup, means that when we have this backup that was down in just one specific zone, we are going to move in another zone. I'm going to explain what that means zones, okay, in a couple of slides later. But the most important thing is the following: in Azure, in Azure, and the end, you have 3 zones. So that means that we could have different servers in different zones. I'm going to explain later. And another backup storage redundancy will be locally. That means that I'm going to run this backup, and I'm going to save this backup locally in another location, of course, but in the same zone. Okay. If you choose this one, you are going to have how much will be the price. Okay. For example, You have other things about DTUs, about general purpose or business critical. As you can see, it's very important. One of the biggest difference beside the I/O for the DBAs is very important to know one thing. It's about how we implement the high availability. When you choose general purpose, the high availability is based on the storage. So what that mean? That means that you are going to have a server that is attached in one just only storage, but internally this storage will be replicated in another 3 storage. Okay, so if you run or something happen, for example, we have reconfiguration or something like this, or we have an error, this we are going to have another immediately. We are going to switch on another machine. This machine will attach in this in the previous storage or another one. So for the reason, general purpose is very fast because basically this we need to step up one machine and to connect to this static storage. Of course, what that means that is not SQL always on, but in when you choose business critical, you could see for DBAs, you could see one thing that is very important is here, is rate scale. What that mean? That means that the following: when you have business critical, and the end, the high availability, let's say, is based on always on environment with 3 replicas. So we are going to have the main replica and 2 secondaries. That means that like you have in on-premises, if I change the connection string with the application intents equal read-only, I'm going to connect directly to another secondary replica. Of course, it's read-only, but at the end, I could separate right now my OLTP, let's say, when I run in my primary insert delete, but in Power BI, for example, I could read just only using the secondary. Of course, you have other things that I'm going to explain later, but by default, it's very important that to know rate scale. Okay, and I'm going to explain later about some redundant. Okay, so I'm going back to the presentation. The most important thing, as we mentioned, you have here the what is the best. I'm not going to pay focus about what is, because I would like to show you other things about this. Well, other aspect that that is very important for a DBA, I think that is the key point, because if not, you are fired of the company, is the high availability. Okay, so by default, as I mentioned, when you choose general purpose, the high availability is based on the attached storage, and when you choose business critical, is based on always on replicas. But of course, you could add more for you. For example, you could use auto failover group. Basically, is geo-distribution always on distribution. It's always groups. More or less is the on-premises. Okay, so what that means? You are going to have a listener that you are going to connect, but you are going to have your primary server and your secondary server. And the primary secondary will have some amount of databases. Okay, so if something happens, you don't need to change the connection string, because SQL will point to what is the primary in this part. Of course, you could connect to the secondary, okay, for read purpose. So at the end, you need to think those 2 things. You could connect to the primary using rate scale, and you could connect to the secondary that is based on the auto failover. So at the end, you have at least 3 replicas to connect to you that 3 data. You have other things that is called geo-replicas. Geo-replicas is basically always on the environment. You have your primary, and you are going to have other 4 copies of the data around the globe, okay, in read only, okay. But in this case, if you need to run failover because the primary is not working, in this case, yes, in this case you need to change the connection string. Other things is name replicas, and other things that we mentioned before Another thing is thumb redundant. Let me explain in a couple of seconds what that's mean thumb redundant. Well, for DBAs, you know that every time that you install in on-premises one server, you run the installation, always on, etc. And the end, everything depends right now. For example, the air cooler, the protection, the power, etc. But in this case, if you choose thumb redundant, the idea that is behind the scene is the following. The idea is, if you choose business critical, for example, we are going to allocate the 3 servers, primary and 2 secondaries, in different zones inside of the region, inside of the data center. Okay, so what does mean zone redundant? And the end, air cooler, the power is totally different. So if we have some problems in one zone because we have a power outage, automatically we are going to have a failover process to the second zone, and your server will not have, let's say, you're not going to have problems in terms of connection. Of course, the failover process, you need to wait, okay? But this is the most important thing about it, okay? So right now, we have in preview also in general purpose. In general purpose, you have the same, but as I mentioned before, general purpose is based on the storage. So we are going to split the storage in the different zones, okay? Well, I have several things that is very important about it. For example, if you choose different zone, you don't have cost, because this is very important about it. In general purpose, yes, you have some cost. It's not available right now in all the regions, etc. So let me explain how it's possible to implement, for example, right now the one geo replica. Well, as you can see, I have my database that is called .NET example. Basically, I need to create a replica. Basically, I need to click here. Okay, and choose, for example, other server. Let's say this server that's in West Europe. Okay, so at the end, basically in this part, I could choose another database type. Okay, so it's very important to mention one thing. We saw many cases that our customers choose a lower database tier from their geo replicas. Is good or not? Well, it's good in order to pay less, but if the primary has a lot of workload, most probably the primary will be affected in the secondary, because as you know, when you send the data, let's say using let's give an example like log shipping, and then you are going to have a lot of transactions pending in the primary to send to the secondary. If the secondary is not able to manage all these requests, you are going to have a bottleneck here. So for the reason, our recommendations, of course, you need to test this one, is always to use the same database tier that you have in the primary, okay? Or you could use another one, or you could use a higher environment, okay? So at the end, doing this, basically when I click create, I'm going to have another replica in another server that I could use for reading data, okay? It's pretty much very simple about it. Other things that is very important, it's about how to create failover groups in a similar manner that we have in on-premises. Basically, is go to the failover groups, as you can see here, and choose what will be my listener. Let's say my SQL Friday server. Okay. What will be the server that will be the primary, sorry, secondary. Right now, this is a very important thing. Right now, it's about what will be the grace period. Well, this is the most common question that we have. Why 1 hour of grace period to run an automatic failover? Our product team thinks that 1 hour is enough because we have in the region, we have three replicas of the data. We have some redundant. We have many situations that not needs to have time in order to prepare these operations. Okay, so for the reason we choose 1 hour. Of course, you could implement a PowerShell command, whatever you want, in order to run automatically the failover. If you run, for example, if you run in a test ping, for example, if you saw that it's not responding the primary, you could run automatically using PowerShell, other commands to run the failover by yourself. Okay, but automatically you could run these such of things. And also you could choose your databases. You could choose 3, 4 other databases that you need in you to implement the failover. So the main difference between failover and GeoReplicas is GeoReplica, you need to change the connection, and in failover, you don't need to change the connection, okay, in terms of application. Other things is about the backups. This is a very common question that we have every day. Okay, it's about what is the backup retention, what is the cost of the backups, etc. Well, at the end, the maximum retention of the backups that we have is 35 days. Okay, but we have many customers that, for business reason, they want to use more than this. In this case, you could use one thing that is called long retention period. Okay, long retention period is you could save your backups for more than 10 years. Okay, of course, you could create your own backup. In Azure SQL Database, and unfortunately, there is not possible to run backup database. In this case, you need to export your data, running a backpack. Most probably you know these sorts of things. Backpack is not how to say this one, is not a native backup. It's an exporting process. So for the reason, always our recommendation is when you run an export process, is try that your database will not, let's say, receiving updates. Because as you know, when we have an export process, basically it's reading the rows and save the data in one bulk file, okay, bulk insert file, BCP file at the end. Okay, could be, we could have some situation that you're running, you are doing one modification that it's based in another query, and you have some, another table, and you have integrity and referential issues. So for the reason, the idea that we have is try to restore restore a backup of database and export this data from this backup. I would like to mention also in Azure SQL Managed Instance, you have the native backup. Okay, so native backup means that beside the backups that we have every 5-10 minutes of the transaction log, 1 time or 2 times per day about differential, and 1 full backup per week, you could run your backups. Okay, you could save this backup. And unfortunately, right now, there is not possible to restore the backup that we have in managed instance to on-premises. I know that our product team is working on it. I don't know when, okay, that we are going to have this opportunity to restore the backup directly from managed instance to on-premises. Okay, right now we are working in our colleagues from managed instance. The product team is working in multiple things to try to integrate this hybrid environment. Let's say that to include, for example, right now, one thing that is called link MI is to have another, you have your own premises, and you are going to link another replica in managed instance. Okay, so it's really amazing. So at the end, we are going in this way because we receive many requests from multiple customers in support asking these questions. Okay, let me show you basically one example about the backups, how it's possible to run the backup. Okay, of course, there is not possible to modify the recovery model. Okay, we have full full in every database. So 1 second, backups here. Yeah. So here, as you can see here, you could run the backup, as I mentioned, from 1 day to 15 days. Or you could run, for example, how is the differential backup or if you're using long-term retention period, one is when you want to have the weekly, monthly, and yearly. Let me explain for the DBAs in order to save you cost, the cost of the backups. Well, what does mean the cost of the backups? It's very important because we receive many questions about it. So we have customers say, okay, I don't want to use full, but as I mentioned before, it's not possible to change right now. But what happens if you have your backup? When you create your database, when we create your database, we create a full backup, and starting this point, we are going to have transaction log backup every 10 minutes, differential backup every right now 24 hours. So at the end, the size of the backups of the transaction log and differential backup will be the cost will be, let's say the size will be the cost that you need to pay for the backup. So what that mean? That means if I run a huge amount of operations, let's say a bulk insert and insert, I don't know, millions with of data with using binary files or text files, and the end most probably when you receive the amount of your backup will be you have an extra cost. Why? Because if you calculate based on the number of days that you have here and the size of the different size of the transaction backup for differential, and the end if this amount is more than the size of the database, you are going to start changing by, I don't remember exactly the cost, but you are going to start paying for this difference. So for the reason, it's very important for a DBA, for you, is what is the best option for me in order to have the balance or to find the balance between cost and backup retention. For the reason, if you choose 1 day, the cost will be less because the backup will be kept just only 1 day. Or for example, if I choose, let's say 5 days, I will like that the differential backup instead 12 hours will be every 24 hours. Okay, so of course, you know that the differential backup sometimes contain more data that in reality the data that has been changed. Okay, but for the reason we choose this one, okay, because it's very important in order to reduce the space, the total space of the backup. Okay, so it's very important this because if not, you could start receiving some extra cost when in Azure. Okay, so I'm going to we have several recommendations from managed instance when you restore the data from on-premises to MI. For example, the time. So we saw cases that the customers say, oh, the restore database took a huge amount of time, but I don't know when. Well, one trick is because when we restore the data, we run a checksum before put online the database. If you run your backup, including the checksum, we are not going to run this process and the restore process will take less time. Okay, of course, the typical things is about reduce the size, use premium blob storage, etc. But one of the biggest concerns that we have right now also it's about the checksum, because if not, when we run the checksum, we need to run the TechReady. We include several details about how to run the backups. When you want to run your own backup, you could use SQL Agent in managed instance. Of course, the most important thing is to use the copy only. You know the reason. When you are running, it's to avoid to have any problem with the log chain. Okay, so basically for the reason you need to use the copy only in order to didn't affect to the log chain. Well, you have other ways to export the data, but this is an example so I'm going because basically you need to read the files and read the documentation, etc. So other very important thing for us, it's about secure data. Okay, by default, every time that you create a database will be TDA encrypted. So we are going to encrypt the data in at rest. So every file will be encrypted using your key vault. If you want to, you could use your own key, or we could use all the default key that we have in Azure. Other things, it's about TLS. Every time that your application try to connect to SQL Server, to Azure SQL Server, the data will be encrypted. I'm going to show you how to encrypt the data, but it's very simple. Also, it's about the firewall. Well, let me explain several details about the firewall. The firewall invests in two cases. The firewall, every time we have many cases that our customer create a case for us, mention that, oh, my server has opened multiple ports, more than the 1433. They run a penetration test, and we saw this. We report this file. Well, you need to know that in Azure SQL Database, you are not going to have a direct access to your server. All the connections will go through a gateway. Gateway is a combination between hardware and software, appliance and software that validate the connection. We have many things in order to protect your connections, okay? The night of servers, the night DDoS, for example, protect that, for example, password incorrect, etc. So we have many mechanisms that I'm going to explain because it's by default it's a secret, but the most important thing is we are going to protect your connection. Other very common questions that we have in support, and you are going to have many questions about in your work daily, it's about the difference between private and public endpoint. Well, public endpoint means that your connections go through a gateway. It's a public endpoint that we have in Azure. Okay, all these connections go through this public endpoint. Of course, when you reach the public endpoint, reach the gateway, and the gateway have multiple mechanisms in order to protect the connections. That means that that's not mean that it's not secure. It's secure. The most important thing is you are going to be protected. But if you want to use your private endpoint means that just only the machines that using express route, VPNs, or the machines that you have in the same VNet and subnet in Azure will have access directly to this database. It's very important to mention one thing. For public and private, that don't means that more than in private will be an endpoint, but that not mean that your SQL Server will be in the same VNet and subnet. Not. This VNet and subnet or express route will have an connection and private connections to the server, but it's not in VNet. Okay, it's very important because customer thinks that using private, I'm going to have more speed in terms of latency. Sorry, less I/O in terms of latency to connect to the server. No, it's because it's more secure in terms because the connection is just only allowed from these VNets and subnets. Okay. Other things that is very important that we have in on-premises is you could use Azure Active Directory or SQL Login. We have other services that I'm not going to explain here because if not, we are going to have a lot of time. It's, for example, Always Encrypted, Role-Level Security, data masking, discovery, a lot of things. Basically, I would like to explain when you have, sorry, basically, when you install your SQL Server on premises, basically you could enable the mixed authentication, right? So you could use SQL Login and Windows. In this case, basically you could do the same. So if you click here, support only Azure Database, that means that no one's using SQL Login will be able to connect. Okay, that's it. It's very simple. Okay, in this part. We have many other things, as I mentioned, about the firewall rules. As I mentioned before, it's about the version of TLS. In this case, for example, I force that every application that wants to connect to my SQL Server will be using TLS version 1.2. The access of my server, of course, I'm going to delete this when I finish the meeting. And we have multiple things about to secure your connection, okay? Of course, you have Microsoft Defenders in order to protect your data, and many other things that I don't want to go more deep because I don't want to spend more time here. But the most important thing is you are going to be very secure in this part, okay? So again, you could use always encrypted, etc. So other things that as a DBA is, oh, I don't know what happened with my database. We have many questions that, oh, or DBAs mention, no, I'm going to lose the control of my database. I don't know what's happening in my database. So the answer is no. So you're going to have more data that you have. So at the end, you're going to have, based on the environment that you choose, you're going to have two things. In Azure SQL Database, you're going to have SQL auditing. I'm going to show you. It's more or less is a SQL Server on Profiler. Okay. Other thing is monitoring. You are going to have a huge information that I'm going to show you, even executions, query store, errors, timeouts, etc. You're going to have alerts. Alerts means that if your CPU of your database increase for a specific period of time, you are going to have a message, an alert about it. And also you are going to have diagnostic settings that I'm going to show you in the same way. In Azure Managed Instance, you are going to have more or less the same. You're not going to have SQL auditing, but you could use a Profiler, or you could use any other tool. Okay, so let me show you an example. Okay, so I'm going to this is my my server. I'm going to use my database. Of course, as you can see here in auditing, auditing means that all the events that happen in my database, let's say connections, queries, logouts, logins, etc., I'm going to save or in a one storage account, or I'm going to save this data in log analytics or in another event. Okay, using to use in the future to use custom queries. It's another history that we have. Okay, and also you could enable this by database. So if I go here to the auditing, so you are going to save this data, and if I click here in View Audit Logs, you are going to have all the events, okay, that happen in my database. You could do this in this way. Okay, this is the query that I did. Okay, but of course, at the end, this file, if I go to my doc. Sorry, it's there is doc. Yeah, this one. It's my doc. This is a storage account. If I go to the containers, at the end, you are going to recognize is dot example here. You're going to recognize what is the file. It's an extended event. So at the end, you could download these extended events and you could see what happened with your database. Okay. So at the end, I could say that it's part of the SQL profile trace, of course. So even I would like to show you, for example, let me to run a query using Java, for example. It's an application that is running right now. Also, I would like to show you, one second. Yeah, it's here. For example, in Azure Data Studio, you have a plugin in Azure SQL Database that is called Launch Profiler. It's an extension. As you can see right now, you could see right now what happened with my application. So I could see how much time took the operations, how much or what is the application name that's connecting, the login, the IP, etc. So you have any other ways in order to detect this information beside the SQL algorithm. Okay. In managed instance, in terms of monitoring, you have other things. Okay, you have, for example, or typical reports. I like it, to be honest with you, the typical report that we have about performance dashboard. Okay, so I like it this way because at the end I feel like at home using on premises. So I could see this one. I could see everything about the basic things about my reports, to review the I/O, for example, etc. Of course, you could run the profiler in managed instance, of course. So you could run these types of things, but you have, you know that we have some impact using this one, but you have a new option here that appear just only when you are connecting in on-premises in managed instance that is called Extended Event Profiler. Okay, basically the idea that is behind is to enable the extended events in order to launch these sessions. Okay, and you are going to have the similar scenario, the similar data that you have right now in your managed instance. Okay, so at the end, in terms of monitoring that you have, it's very simple. You are going to have all the events here with all the data without any issues. Of course, if you open the management in managed instance, not in SQL, you are going to see the SQL Server logs in the similar manner that you have in on-premises. So you could see what happened in my database. So it's very, in terms of performance for you, it's the same. I have just only 6 minutes, but I would like to also explain other things. It's about Query Store. So at the end, you know that Query Store is an amazing tool that we have right now in order to know what happened in the past. Of course, basically one of the reports that I like it too much, this is my favorite, is to use weighted statistics, because using weighted statistics, if you configure here what happened in, let's say, in the last hour, not, but in the last, I don't know, last month, you could see what happened in my database. What happened, for example, I have a problem, let's say in Network I/O, or I have problems with parallelism or CX packet, or I have buffer I/O. So one thing that I like it is if I click here, I'm going to see all the queries related about it. And I'm going to choose this one, and I'm going to, okay, what happened with this query? Oh, well, I have a huge amount of data in this query. It's normal to have I/O or other things that is very important about it. So for the reason we have the same in on-premise, sorry, in SQL Azure. Okay. Also in SQL Azure, one other things that I like it. It's, for example, this one is to see the what happened in my database. For example, I have many metrics about what is the CPU percentage. For example, what is I/O percentage. Many things that you could help. You could know what happened in my database. Even one of the advanced that we have, it's this one. It's about the performance recommendations. Performance recommendation is other option that we have that will, I think that will be implemented soon in on-premises, is based on your workload. We are going to analyze your workload, and we are going to give you what is the best recommendations. I need to create indexes, or I need to drop the indexes because it's not using anymore, or we are using, or you need to parameterize to use the parameters and query, or etc. Okay, it's very important because at the end, this technology help a lot in our day by day in terms of troubleshooting. So I have just only 4 minutes. I will I don't have time for this, but as I mentioned, we cover more or less several things. But I would like to discuss with you one thing that I would like to very important about the DBAs. When you are working with developers, we need to explain, we need to know, or we need to explain to the developer what is the difference between command timeouts and connections timeout. Okay, because you know that sometimes you receive a call from your developer say, "Oh, I'm not able to connect," but you could see that timeout experience running a query. No, it's something different. Okay, so it's very important about to explain about it. We have a session that we explain this, giving an example about it. Okay, and also about the network latency. It's very important because right now, one of the biggest concerns that we have is, oh, in Azure, we are going to have more network latency. Well, you're going to have a little bit, not will be seconds, will be a few milliseconds, because at the end, the server, the application will be in one place and the databases will be another place in the same region, in the same data center, but a little bit different. So at the end, you are going to have several milliseconds. Finally, I would like to share with you this best practice that we could share these sessions. It's what is the tips and tricks that we use to share with developers when they are working with, when we have performance cases. More or less, I'm sure that you know everything about it. This is the most typical question, the most typical cases that we have. Very important is about idle connections. So close, open, and close the connection as soon as possible is very important. Okay, the connection pooling. I could show you an example that our customers say, "Oh, I'm not able to connect, but I reach the maximum connection pooling." You know, in this part as a DBA. So, well, this is the part. Right now, this is the final part of the presentation. Right now, we could ask questions if I could reply the question. If not, I'm going to, if you provide your email, I'm going to try to find the solution or the answer.
Yes, I have 2 questions. One is my own, so I'm going to start with that. In the beginning, you talked about the elastic query functionality of Azure SQL Database. Is that using Polybase under the hood, or what technology is used there?
It's a great question, Magnus. In fact, it's different. It's different. Okay, so because let's say that elastic queries came from first that Polybase. Elastic query, the biggest difference that we have is elastic query is just only for SQL Azure Database. Okay, in order to, let's say, to connect, when you are connected to one database, to connect to another database or another server. Okay, when you have databases per customers, etc. Polybase will be, for example, in managed instance. Right now, you know that we have Polybase. It's not fully implemented, okay, but we have Polybase. But right now, there is not possible to use the databases. We don't have right now the ability to connect to another servers. But you could use linked server. I'm sure that in a couple of months, I don't know, but a couple of months, Polybase will be fully implemented in order to connect to the other databases, like, I don't know, Oracle or whatever you want.
Cool. Next question is from Antonio, who is asking, is it possible to connect to SQL Azure Database using a different port than 1433 because of restrictions in the company network or whatever? So.
It's a very good question. The answer is it's not possible, Antonio. It's not possible. Let me explain. I don't know if I have the chance. 1 second. It's not possible. So answering your question is no. But remember that the connection against the 1433 will not use server. Okay, it's very important. So all the connections that you are going to have is connecting to the gateway. Let me try to find 1 second. Give me 1 second. I would like to find 1 second. Actually. It's here. Yeah, so let me to change to English because it's not in Spanish.
I always get that. And yeah, I mean, I always get Swedish, but it's automatically translated also, so it's not always the best translation.
Okay, so let me explain. This is the connections that. So this is your application. Okay, you are using the connection 1433. So this is the gateways. This is the appliance that receives the connection. Okay, here we have several mechanisms to protect your database. So if we saw, for example, that someone wants to verify the port, for example, we are going to ban it, let's say this IP for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. If someone wants to connect to your server, suppose that he knows your server, and it's tied with a password and the brutal force. We are going to this IP. We are going to ban it, this IP for 10 minutes. We have cases that customers that they are using just only one IP from his office to Azure. When one developer changed the password without noticing, okay, and the password is wrong. So this developer tried to connect, and after this, no one in the company was able to connect because we banned the connection. So we have several things that is very important, okay? But the most important to explain is we are going to protect your connection here, okay? Before to reach the real server that is here, that is behind this gateway, okay? In this part.
So I hope that answers your question, Antonio. He wrote something more like, is port forwarding, is that a component that we can put in front of it? Can we install a port mapper of some kind as a network component?
Yes, it's another technology, it's another way. I think that in our blog, if you, I don't remember right now in our blog, because we have many articles in our blog. I think that we explain about the port forwarding. It's another way. It's another way to connect. I don't remember exactly, but yes, it's possible. Also to use VPN. Also, it's possible. About that. Yes, for sure, it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. That sums up the questions. I think you mentioned it may in the future be possible to do a backup of managed instance and restore on premise. I think Bob Ward mentioned in a slide during basically the pre-launch of SQL Server 2022 during I think Ignite. I think he mentioned that it will be possible when SQL 22 is in general, well, GA basically.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's the that we receive a lot of feedbacks. For us, the most important thing is all the DBAs to be more comfortable with the tool. One of the almost questions that we have is why not to restore the data in on premises. Yes, this was yes, but right now I don't want to say anything about general availability because I don't know when.
That's true.
I don't know when. Okay, but yes, we have this. Yes.
No, and no one knows. I guess not even Microsoft knows when the date for the GA will be. We don't know that basically.
I don't know.
I think the public preview was about to start in May or something. So, I mean, from the first CTP in public, it's going to be a while before we get the GA version. So.
Yes, I saw also, Magnus, it's possible also right now to request to be in the private preview in SQL Server 2022. But yeah, but for me, I think that will mark a huge difference in this part because at the end, is we have done a lot of work in order to be in the same, how to say, the same page that on premises. Okay, the 99, let's say, features that we have, and right now the question is how to integrate, let's say, with on premises, because right now I completely understand. So I would like to have a double, or I would like to have my data in my environment. Of course, for two reasons. Right now, I think that we are going to implement these sorts of things based on the DBA's feedback, the customers, etc. So I think that most probably very soon we are going to have this
But I like what I've seen so far in the presentations about SQL 22 or 2022. The ability to set up a distributed availability group. I haven't tested anything in the private preview, but from what I saw during Bob and the other guys' presentations on Ignite, it looks very promising to be able to, you know, if I want to migrate 10 terabytes of databases to Azure, that's going to be pretty hard. But now when we get SQL 2022 and we can set up, you know, Microsoft Azure as the DR site and then fail over to it, then I mean we could do it with just minutes of downtime. So that's really going to be a door opener for
yeah, for sure. No, I'm very excited about it, because when we have this, so at the end we are going to have a lot of problems in troubleshooting, in support, because at the end I don't know, because right now it's sometime in at least in managed instance, we have cases that is very common to have a lot of network issues, because our customer implement tools like Bastion, appliance, a lot of software. So at the end, it's natural. So at the end, we are transferring our business, let's say, to Azure, right? So at the end, when we have this option, I think that will mark a very huge milestone in terms to have this hierarchy in both environments, I think. Yeah.
So I think that will be the final words for today. I want to thank you so much, Jose, for coming.